It is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome everybody here to our, I think it's our second or third online lecture of the Ancient India and Iran Trust. And it is wonderful to see so many of you here tonight for this special event on which we are hosting two speakers. And our two speakers are Dr. Samuel Thrope, who has just been appointed as a curator of the Islam and Middle East collection at the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem. And we have Dr. Domenico Agostini, who has also quite recently taken up a position as senior lecturer in ancient history at Tel Aviv University in the Department of General History. Now, Samuel was born and raised in Arlington in Massachusetts, and he earned his PhD at the University of California at Berkeley, where he did his PhD with Professor Martin Schwartz, and his PhD was on the Shkant-Gumanik Vizar. Dr. Thrope has also translated a number of texts. One of them is Jalal al-Ahmad's The Israeli Republic, published in 2017. And with Roberta Casagrande Kim and Raquel Ukeles, he edited the 2018 exhibition catalogue, Romance and Reason, Islamic Transformation of the Classical Past. Domenico Agostini, in turn, he completed his PhD at La Sapienza with Carlo Ceretti, and at the same time with Philipp Heuser at the École Pratique des Hautes Études in 2013. So Domenico holds a double PhD from two universities. His publications are concerned with historical, religious, and philological topics pertaining to pre-Islamic Iran and Zoroastrianism. But the area he has worked on most is Iranian eschatology and apocalyptics. In spite of his relatively young age, Dr. Agostini has already established himself as an expert of Iranian apocalyptic literature, especially through his edition of the central text of that genre, the Ayodgar-i-Jama Speak, his PhD thesis, The Memoir of Jamas. But in addition to that, he has also published a wide range of articles. Now, the reason why we have two speakers tonight is that Domenico and Samuel have just published a new translation of the Bundahišn. It's a new translation and much overdue work, which has just come out. They are making the Bundahišn available for the first time, really, in a readable and digestible format. They will be talking about their book tonight, about the Bundahišn, and amongst the two, Samuel will start. He will speak first about the literature of the Bundahišn, while Domenico will explore in greater depth the central theme of the Bundahišn, which is the role of Ahriman and the evil creation in the Bundahišn. And this is a very topical, very appropriate topic in the time of the pandemic, where we have a horrible virus causing havoc in the world, just as evil does. So we very much look forward to your talks, and on the topic, the search for lost time, insights on Zoroastrian literature from the new translation of the Bundahišn. So now I pass on the word to Sam to start with. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thanks very much, Almut. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to speak before such a convivial audience with so many friendly faces. almost as good as being in Cambridge in person, but this is a close second best. So I wanted to say a couple of words about the trust and why it's so important for Nico and myself to have the opportunity to present the book in this forum. Without the assistance of the trust, I really don't think that we would have finished this book at all. In particular, Almut and also Nicholas Sims-Williams were instrumental in giving us access to a copy of Sir Harold Walter Bailey's critical edition and translation of this text, the Bundahišn, right, which he first completed for his DPhil in 1933. And it's thanks to your generosity and to Bailey's own erudition that we could gain such crucial insights and were saved from really a large number of errors as we worked on the translation. So again, I'm glad to have the opportunity to express my thanks in person. As Almut said, we're going to be doing the presentation tonight in two parts, right? And that, it seems to me, it suits a joint project such as this. Not only because there are two of us, but because there are kind of two dovetailing aims of this translation of the Bundahišn. One more scholarly and the other more literary. So as many of you know, and excuse me if I'm repeating, information that you already have, but the Bundahišn is the major Zoroastrian text on creation, cosmology, and eschatology. It was written in Middle Persian, an older relative of the language spoken in Iran today, and the book's 36 chapters are actually organized more or less chronologically, right? From the initial conflict between the good creator god Ormazd and the evil spirit Ahriman in the spiritual realm. That's followed by an account of Ormazd's fashioning of the physical world in perfection and tranquility, and Ahriman's attack on and corruption of it. Then the time of the mixture, which is the time that we live in now, when good and evil struggle against each other in the created world. And then finally, at the end of the book, the apocalyptic battle that will rid creation of evil forever. So in charting the course of time, charting the course of history in this way, the Bundahišn, it delves into a range of topics, right? A really extensive number of subjects, from astronomy to zoology. And while it's not exhaustive, I think that we can legitimately say that the Bundahišn is kind of like a concise compendium of knowledge at the time of its compilation. Scholars think that this book dates to the 9th century, more or less. That is about 300 years after the Islamic conquests of the Sasanian Empire. And while the Bundahišn certainly reflects knowledge and the literary conventions of its early Islamic milieu, the book also contains more ancient traditions, right, including translations of the Zoroastrian sacred scriptures, the Avesta. So I'm just going to sort of hop back and forth between the PowerPoint. Just give me one second. So this is just a nice illustration, a manuscript of the Bundahišn from the British Library in Pazand, and the cover of the book, which is pretty, I think. So the Bundahišn has long been known and used by scholars of ancient Iran. But until recently, the field, as Almut said, lacked an accessible and up-to-date translation. And so our first aim in taking on this project 10 years ago when we started it was exactly that, to provide scholars with a readable and reliable translation of the central Zoroastrian text. The other aim was of a different sort. We hope that the English version of the Bundahišn can bring this book and ancient Iranian literature as a whole into the wider cultural conversation in the Anglophone world. That I know that's a little vague. I know it sounds a little vague, but I hope that the presentations that we'll give tonight will give you a sense of what that means. As you listen, please take this as an offering of how we might read the Bundahišn and how we might read it differently. So I want to begin then with a curious fact about the book. As I mentioned, the Bundahišn is largely made up of passages from earlier sources. And in this sense, we can think of it kind of as a patchwork text, right? Woven together from quotes and citations from the Avesta and from the accompanying Zoroastrian tradition. So for example, we can take this text that you can see on your screen now, right? So this is the opening few sentences of chapter 13 of the Bundahišn, a chapter that's entitled on the nature of the 5 forms of animals. Right, so I'll just read it. It says in the Dane, when the soul-created cow passed away, in the place where his marrow scattered grew 55 species of grain and 12 species of medicinal plants. As it says, from the marrow, sesame, and peas, because of their marrowy nature, they themselves are marrow. From the horns, lentils. From the nose, vetch. And here there's a nice little play on words between the Middle Persian word for nose and the plant vetch. From the blood, the fruit of the vine, from which they make wine. For this reason, wine increases the blood so powerfully. From the lungs, mustard. From the middle of the head, elecampane, and marjoram to keep away the stench of akuman, to oppose the coming of harm and the other evils one by one. As it says in the Avesta, he made 1 species of grain in the primal creation. He made it as fodder for horses. 1 species was there, and then he brought it to the Arang River. So this passage, as you can see, it refers to actually 3 different sources, right? Or 3 different parts. First, there's the Dane. Then there's an unnamed source or tradition, which Nico and I think is also likely the Dane. And then the Avesta, one of the few references to the Avesta actually in the text. So the Dane, which is the source that's cited most often in the Bundahišn, it needs a bit more explanation, I think. Den is a central concept of Zoroastrianism, and it's, of course, notoriously difficult to translate. Etymologically, dens comes from the ancient Iranian word for sight or seeing, and one of its meanings is directly related to vision and envisionment. The den, as chapter 30 of the Bundahišn tells us, is part of the soul, one's own inner consciousness, and the den appears actually to each individual after death. For the righteous, they see their den as a beautiful girl, and the wicked see it as an ugly hag. Den also has another meaning though, and it's used in a way that overlaps kind of with the modern concept of religion. In this sense, the den is the good religion, the Mazda worshipping religion, that is Zoroastrianism. And not just the Avesta, not just the sacred scriptures, but the Zand, right? All its commentaries and translations. And even more than that, it's not just Zoroastrianism proper, but actually all human wisdom and truth. All that are part of the den. So the den is much wider than the sacred scriptures. And accordingly, many of the quotes from the den that we find in the Bundahišn are not actually included in the Avesta as it's come down to us. And there are lots and lots of passages in the Bundahišn, pretty much the whole book, that resembles the text that you're seeing on your screen now. In the sense that they're stitched together, woven together from short citations or quotes of earlier texts. This is especially clear, I think, in the chapters that we might refer to as scientific, right? Those dealing with astronomy, zoology, meteorology, geology, embryology, medicine, and lots more. The more narrative chapters, though, right? The chapters that deal with myth, that deal with eschatology, they also have this very same character. So, for instance, I just want to share another text with you. This is from chapter 24, and it's called On Various Things, How They Were Created, and How Their Adversaries Came. And this chapter, it describes, as the title suggests, which evil beings came to oppose which good creations. And it opens as follows. So I'll just read also this one. It says in the den, white home, which they call the Gokaran tree, grows in the Frachkard Sea, that deep lake, and is necessary for the performance of the restoration, since they will prepare the drink of immortality from it. The evil spirit, in opposition to it, fabricated a frog in that deep water, so that it might destroy the home. To restrain the frog, Ormuzd created 2 cardfish, who constantly circle the home. One of the fish always faces the frog. Those fish consume only spiritual food. That means they do not need to eat, so that they keep struggling until the restoration. In one place, it is written, the aquatic fish arise. As it says, the greatest of Ormuzd's creatures is that fish, and the evil spirit's greatest creature in strength and body is that frog. Everything in both creations is divided between them, except one fish, the was of 500 lakes. It also says this: that fish is so perceptive that in deep water it can sense a needle that raises or lowers the water. This chapter as a whole focuses on the mythical creatures who play a role in the earthly battle against evil animals, and also in Zoroastrian eschatology. Home, which is mentioned already in the Avesta, and there's also references to it in Vedic literature. So it's a sacred plant that is used to prepare the elixir of immortality at the end of days. In his attempt to prevent the restoration, that is the process of the final purification of the earth, Ahriman fabricates a frog to eat the home. In response, Ormazd creates two supernatural fish to protect it. Not only do the fish, described as Ormazd's greatest creation, have no need to eat, they're supremely sensitive. So much so that they can feel even if the water level is raised by so little as the weight of a needle. So details aside, what I want to underline again about this passage is that it is also a text of parts. A quote from the Den, a second citation that provides an alternative name for the fish, then two further quotes that go into more detail on the contest between fish and frog. Let's stop the share. So taken together, I think the Bundahišn has the feeling of a work that was constructed from memory, a patchwork composition of remembered, half-remembered, or maybe misremembered passages. This sense arises, I think, not only from the fact that sometimes only the thinnest layers of narrative mortar link the quotations and references that are the bricks of the book, but also from what the Bundahišn leaves out. Though it surveys actually a really vast terrain of knowledge, there are a number of surprising absences if we consider it from the perspective of other Zoroastrian literature. There are only very, very few references to ritual, for instance. Also very few to liturgy, or even the purity laws that are the central topics of other Zoroastrian texts. At the same time, the prophet Zoroaster, the founder of the religion, right, and author of its most ancient hymns, he's mentioned a few times, but the Bundahišn lacks an account of his revelation or an extensive discussion of his biography. We can kind of put it this way: if we had only the Bundahišn, we would know precious little about the prophet. And luckily, as I said, there are other Zoroastrian works that do fill the gap. So instead, what I find really fascinating about this book is that the theme it returns to time and time again is time itself. As I mentioned, the overall structure proceeds chronologically, from creation in the beginning to apocalypse in the end. Creation also begins with time, though not "let there be light," not "in the beginning was the word." Instead, we read in chapter 1 that from eternity, Ormazd creates time of long dominion, the finite time period of 9,000 years within which the struggle between good and evil unfolds. And Nico's going to talk more about that struggle in his lecture. More than that, though, more than just the fact that it opens with time, there are explicit references to time scattered throughout the text. The length of the year and the days of the month are discussed in numerous chapters, and chapter 1 includes just such a passage about the calendar as an appendix to the story of creation. Similarly, chapter 25 is wholly devoted to calendars and chronography. The theme of marking time in the present, past, and future appears in other ways as well. Chapters 5 and 6 turn to reckoning by the stars and include retrospective horoscopes for creation and for Geomart, right, the first created human being. Chapters 13, 14, 16, 22, and 23 deal with the genealogies of animals, human beings, plants, and evil vermin, retracing their family trees from the beginning to the multitude of species that we see today. Chapter 15 deals with embryology and the reproductive cycles of different animals, and chapter 19 on sleep prescribes the length of time a person should sleep each day. Chapters 29, 31, 32, and 35 delve into the mythic past, and chapters 30 and 33 chart the eschatological future. The Bundahišn is filled with discussions of time and how to measure time's flow. So, for the sake of argument, okay, if we consider the Bundahišn a text produced from memory, why is it that time is so prominent in the remembering mind? In thinking about an answer, right? This is experimental, right? It's all what I'm saying now. But in thinking about an answer, I'd like to refer to a modern case of a similar memory-bound text. I'll go back to the sharing. In 1939, a Polish officer named Józef Chapski was taken prisoner during the course of the joint Nazi-Soviet invasion of Poland. A painter and writer who had lived in Paris for 8 years. Chapski was one of only 395 captured Polish military officers who was not immediately murdered by the Red Army. Transferred to a prison camp and guarded by the state security police, the NKVD, these Polish prisoners organized a series of impromptu evening lectures, delivered after the day's labor and before lights out. With no books or materials, each prisoner spoke from memory about the area of his specialization or amateur interest. As Chapski writes, I can still see my companions, worn out after having worked outdoors and temperatures dropping as low as minus 45 degrees, packed together underneath portraits of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, listening intently to lectures on themes very far removed from the reality we faced at that time. This passage and everything I'm going to say about Chapski as a whole, they come from a really wonderful translation of his own lecture, translated by Eric Harpeles and called Lost Time, Lectures on Proust in a Soviet Prison Camp. And the picture you're seeing is actually the site of the camp itself in the Soviet Union. So this title fits the lecture because Chapski spoke about Proust and In Search of Lost Time. It was a subject he knew well, not only because he had read and reread this epic novel, and also most of the biographical and critical literature then published about it, but because during his time in Paris, he came to be friends with many of Proust's acquaintances, patrons, and even some of his family members. So without the actual printed versions of the novel to consult, right, there wasn't a library in the Gulag, Chapski recalled what he could of Proust's book, and sometimes even misremembered certain details. Right, in the lecture, he mistook the famous Madeleine cake that sparks the whole cascade of memory, right, that the book opens with. So he writes that it was a brioche instead. Chapski weaves together the details of Proust's own life with the loves, pains, and salon evenings attended by his characters. All in all, it's a world away from the cold privation of the Gulag. Chapski's talk, though, it wasn't escapism. The point of it was salvation. The major theme that he returned to again and again was Proust's last days. When confined to bed, the author wrote night and day in his room. Subjected to forced labor and interrogation, and with death close at hand, this invocation of Proust and his artistic resistance in the face of death inspired the prisoner's own resilience. Recalling, even half recalling In Search of Lost Time, it was like a ray of light piercing the clouds. It was a reminder from another time and place. So as the translator says in his introduction, Chapski soon recognized Proust's value as a practical template for survival. His lectures were an act of resistance, stimulating the recovery and retention of personal memories that could protect and defend his colleagues from the attempt to deprive each of them of a sense of self. So, in other words, remembering literature when it seems most incongruous, most useless and forgotten, it actually has the power to save your life. Proust's work, which after all is about memory, I imagine is particularly well suited to this purpose. But the recollection of other works in other places has also had a similar salvific power. So there's a lot more to say about this, about Chapski and about Proust and all this stuff. What I want to highlight, though, is what we may call this role of remembered literature in a time of trauma. The Bundahišn also, at least it seems so to me, was produced in kind of parallel circumstances. Not the personal trauma of imprisonment and forced labor, of course, but the national trauma of the loss of independence. The Muslim conquest of Iran and the downfall of the Sasanian dynasty were events of unprecedented destructiveness and disruption in Iranian history. This destruction reverberated through Sasanian society, though, of course, it goes without saying, there was so much continuity as well. It wasn't simply in destruction. But that being said, this rupture, it seemed to have particularly affected Zoroastrian religious institutions. As scholars continue in their efforts to reconstruct Sasanian Zoroastrianism, the central role of the royal court in sponsoring and promoting the priesthood becomes increasingly clear. When the court disappeared, so did the main patrons of the priests, as well as centuries of knowledge with them. In this light, the conquest must have seemed like an enormous derailment of time itself. The Bundahišn even hints as much in chapter 33, and you see the passage here, a chronicle of the events that occurred and will occur in each millennium, from creation to the coming of the final savior, Soshans. In the 4th millennium, we read, after the coronation of the last Sasanian king Yazdgird, when Yazdgird came to the throne, he ruled 20 years. Then the Arabs invaded Iran in great numbers. Yazdgird did not yield to them in battle. He went to Khorasan in Turkestan, asking for horses, men, and aid. They killed him there. Yazgird's son went to India and brought back an army and troops. Before he reached Khorasan, he was killed and his army and troops destroyed. Iran remained in the hands of the Arabs. From the primal creation until today, there was no evil worse than this. For their vile deeds have brought want, desolation, and violence, and their upholding of a bad law and a bad den have invited danger, misery, and other evils. It says in the den, their evil rule shall end. This is why I think time is so central to the Bundahišn. In calling from memory the fragments of earlier literatures, in piecing them together into a new text, the Bundahišn attempts to heal by returning time to its rightful course. In the book, time proceeds reliably, unwaveringly, marching through the cosmic ages of the world, as through the 5 divisions of the day and the months and years. And in fact, the passage that I just cited, of course, goes on after the time of Yazdgird through to the end of history and the final apocalypse. Readers can go back to the origins of everything and to the roots of an animal's family tree, and forward to the fate of the soul after death and the final melting of the mountains that will plug the hole of hell. In the end, like Chapski's lecture, the Bundahišn is a book of solace, comforting readers that time has not, despite appearances, gone off track, and that the promise of salvation still holds true. Thanks very much. Thanks for your attention. Helmut?
Thank you very much, Samuel, for this wonderful survey of this amazing text. And now we move straight on to Domenico Agostini.
Thank you very much. Good evening. First of all, I would like to reiterate our thanks to the ancient India and Iran Trust for this invitation and for sharing with us digital copies of Bailey's works. And of course, I would like again thank Professor Almutin and also Professor Nicholas Sims Williams for their support and help during the preparation of this book. Tonight, I would like to talk about the role of the evil in the Bundahišn, that is the primal creation. Probably I will say many things that many very good colleagues of mine here know, but I hope to not be so boring. In the dualistic Zoroastrian system, evil is represented by Ahriman, the evil spirit, who, together with his dreadful violent demons and fiends, is the main opponent of the good creator or must, and as we will see very soon, plays an important, crucial role in the Zoroastrian cosmogonic drama, as described in the Bundahišn. For people not familiar with our villain Ahriman, this is in Middle Persian how we find sometimes the name Ahriman, but many times we found also upside down in a sign of scorn and abhorrence. We have not many representation of Ahriman, but one of the most, just a moment, I will put a bit bigger. One of the most famous is what we find in the bas-relief of Ardashir, the first Sasanian king, is the investiture of Ardashir by Ormazd. You can see here Ormazd, here there is Ardashir, and under the horse, here there is Ahriman, and here Artabanus IV, the last Parthian king. And let's start saying something about the cosmogonic myth of creation. The Bundahišn says that Ormazd was omniscient, and he knew of the existence of Ahriman and of his plot to destroy the world that Ormazd was to create. For Ormazd limited the time and decided to fashion his creation and creatures in a spiritual condition, Menog, as an army against evil. Now, Menog is another word very difficult to translate. It's a technical word. Here I prepare with a rough definition, the definition of some technical terms. People that they don't know, they can navigate in the Bundahišn with this definition. But let's say that Menog is refers to the world and existence that are essentially spiritual, mental, invisible, and intangible. It's a rough definition, I have to admit. When Ahriman saw the light and the beauty of the abode of Ormazd, is carried back to his dark abode and fabricated his own spiritual Menog counter creation, which was rotten, awful, and bad. After a period of 3,000 years, the two beings had a meeting in which Ormazd proposed peace. But Ahriman, because of his distorted way of thinking, assumed that this proposal was the result of fear. He refused and announced his intention to fight and destroy Ormazd. Then Ormazd proposed to fix a time, 9,000 years, and the field of battle, that is our material world, where we are living now. This suggestion was accepted by Ahriman, who thereby fell into a divine trap. According to the explanation given in the first chapter of Bundahišn, Ormazd's plan was to convince Ahriman to fight within a limited time in a limited space, thus avoiding an everlasting cosmic conflict without any possible end. Afterward, Ormazd stand and make powerless Ahriman for 3,000 years by reciting the Aumvar, one of the most sacred Zoroastrian prayers. During these 3 millennia, Ormazd fashioned his creation in a material and living state, getig. This is another technical term, very difficult to translate. Let's say that getig alludes to the material, visible, physical, tangible world and existence. We translate it in our book. Usually I don't translate, maybe to not make a mistake. But this prototype of creation was still motionless. Among his creations, there was, in order, sky, water, earth, plant, cow, and man. The prototype of man is called Middle Persian Gaiomard, Avestan Gaia Maretan, mortal life, and is described in our text as follows. Let's read. 6. He fashioned Gaiomard, bright as the sun, as tall as 4 measured rods. His wings equal to his age, on the bank of the river the Iti, which is located in the middle of the world. Now, let me find this. I think this is a great stamp seal engraved with Guillaume that is belonging to the British Museum. I wanted to give you an idea or a representation of Guillaume. Just a moment, I will put bigger. Here there is a Sasan. There is a short inscription, Middle Persian, according to Gignoux. You can see Samech Samech Nun, Sasan, and it thinks that this is a form without the long A, but this is not interesting for our talk, of course. And however, this pure and perfect material creation of Ormuzd was destined to be attacked by Ahriman. In fact, after 3,000 years, Ahriman wakes up and invades and defiles the material creation of Ormuzd. As I said before, this was part of Ormuzd's plan to trap and annihilate the spiritual demonic forces. The period of mixture, Gumezizn, begins with the onslaught of Ahriman and his demons. Gumezizn, another technical word, is the mixed state, if you want to read better, of good and evil in the physical world following Ahriman's attack on creation, a state that persists in our own lived historical time. This period marks the beginning of the war between the forces of good and the forces of evil that will end with the total defeat of evil, the restoration of the original pure and perfect world before the onslaught. Our book actually devotes most of its chapters to a description of this period of mixture, a struggle between these two opposite forces. This violent onslaught sets Ormuzd's material creation, which was, as I said before, originally unmoving and tranquil, quiet, in motion. Let's read this passage from Bundahišn. Oops, I'm sorry, what I'm doing. Just a moment, I'm sorry. Okay. When Guillaume woke from his sleep, he saw that the world was dark as night. Not even a pinpoint of the earth was free from scaring vermin. We will see later that vermin is our translation of crab star, is another technical word I will talk later. The firmament was turning. The sun and moon were moving, and the earth echoed with the roar of the giant demons battling the stars. Now, this is something that I like to show my students, is issued from the textual sources for the study of Zoroastrianism by Mary Boyce. This is the world. Already after the onslaught, we can see, because there is already a mountain that is a result of this attack. I will come to this point very soon. And here there is Guillaume, there is the prototype of cow. We can see the Bundahišn, the flat sea, that is the ocean, and the flat art, not anymore flat, because mountains are already there, okay? And but it is very nice that always to show students, because they are extremely interested on the Zoroastrian cosmography. And the attack is also violent, strong and deadly. Ahriman kills the material prototypes, causing a regeneration in multiplicity that populates the material world, our current world. I will give you the example of the prototype of the first man, Guillaume, who is killed by Ahriman, but provides the seed to create the first couple of human beings. As he was passing away, Guillaume emitted seed that was purified in the light of sun. Various sun kept watch over 2 parts of it, and Spandarmat, earth, accepted 1 part. It was in the earth 40 years. At the completion of 40 years, Masha and Mashiane sprouted from the earth in the form of a rubber plant with a single stalk and 15 leaves. The 2 were joined together, and their hands were fixed beside their ears. They had the same stature and the same appearance. After that, Ormazd will divide them. Now, this is the rubber that I remember from my childhood, because my grandmother used to give me terrible candy with rhubarb. But now I know that it's much more important of this disgusting candy. Furthermore, the Bundahišn describes some aspects of the evil pollution of nature, including plants, of the distortion and rupturing of the original flat earth, and the transformation of the originally sweet water. I think in this point, it's nice really to read, to enter the narrative. When the evil spirit burrowed through the earth, shuddered. As the earth quaked, the essence of the mountains, which had been created in the earth, at that moment caused the mountains to begin to move. Similarly, the Bundahišn discusses the origin of earthquakes. And remember, with Sam, we like this passage in particular. Regarding earthquakes, it is evident that those same Chismagian demons use the den of sorcery to obstruct the passage of the life-preserving wind as it goes through the cracks in the mountains, so that it can no longer move. That part of the earth where the wind is trapped begins to shake and splits, and the wind returns to its original path. It might cast a mountain down to the ground, it might overturn the seas, or it might topple houses and buildings. And this one is about the plants. There is explanation for everything. It says in the den, before the coming of the adversary, Ahriman, plants had no thorns or bark. Then, after the onslaught of evil, they became rough and thorny. For though the adversary mixed with everything, he mixed with the plants most of all. That is why there are many plants mixed with venom, such as wolfsbane and marking nut, that are poisonous. Men and animals who eat them die. And the last one, I'm sorry because I didn't put the passage, but you can see what I read. The last one is the salty water. I really like the fact that Bundahišn is really trying to explain everything. He made it rain for 10 days and nights. The vermin poison, which had been in the earth, mixed with the water. It made the water salty, for it remained in the earth. From those seeds, the vermin are still conceived, Kraftstar again. Since the beginning, Ahriman, still unaware of his final defeat, aimed to corrupt men to join his side. It's a battle, it's a war, there are armies, as the Bundahišn reports. The evil spirit Snar. I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, I didn't put this passage. I'm really sorry. But the evil spirit Snar, I will not help your creature that is of all minds, and I will not offer praise. Now I will destroy you and your creatures forever and ever. I will incite all your creatures to hate you and love me. But how does Ahriman act against the human beings? Zoroastrian theology assumes that evil is a spiritual and mental force or drive which can disturb and defile our minds and bodies. Shaul Shakeh has rightly suggested that Ahriman is an anthropological and psychological phenomenon, a sort of parasite that feeds an individual's weakness and possesses him or her. This can be understood from the following passage. I am using the edition of the Denker 6 of by Professor Shaul Shakeh. It is possible to put Ahriman out of this world in such a way that every person, for his own part, should chase him of his body. For Ahriman's habitation in the world is in the bodies of the men. Therefore, when there is not habitation for him in the bodies of men, he is annihilated from the whole world. For as long as in this world, even a small demon has his dwelling the single person of man, Ahriman is in the world. This is exactly what happened to Mash and Mashiane, our Adam and Eve, the first human couple, who fall under temptation quite immediately, and the negative influence of Ahriman, as reported in the Bundahišn. Now, this is something that they found in this manuscript of the vestiges of the past. This is a kind of Zoroastrian version of Adam and Eve story. But let's read this passage because it's interesting. Then the adversary, Ahriman, burrowed into their minds, the minds of Mash and Mashiane, and polluted them. They hold the evil spirit created the water, the earth, plants, animals, and all other things. As it said, the first false speech that deceived them was uttered at the compulsion of the demons. The evil spirit robbed them of their first happiness with that false speech. Both became wicked, and their souls will remain in hell until the final body. The final body is the resurrected body. The process, the final eschatological process, has this resurrection of the dead, evil and righteous. But maybe we can later develop this because probably we won't have time to talk. As said, given its spiritual essence, evil can also manifest itself through a feeling of fear, disease, a troubled state of mind, bad behavior, and so on. Chapter 27 of the Bundahišn includes a detailed list of the different demons who act in the mental and natural sphere. We have, for instance, Zarman, the demon of old age, Waran, the demon of lust, Ushasp, the demon of indolence, Sej, the demon of distraction, Areshk is the demon of envy, Freftar, the demon of deception, and so on. However, the Zoroastrian authors of the Bundahišn sought to answer an important question about the existence of ferocious and dangerous animals. Why are dangerous and ferocious animals embodied in such a ugly, frightening bodies if evil cannot create anything material and everything material belongs to or must? One can find the answer in Bundahišn chapter 23, which deals with the various species of wolves, including lions, tigers, and why not sharks. The text reads as follows. The evil spirit wished to fabricate the wolf, species in a spiritual form, just like fever, pain, and other things that are invisible until they affect human beings. But Ormazd, for the great advantage it would bring, prepared a bodily form for them, which he then showed to the evil spirit. In his afterthought, the evil spirit old, Ormazd himself did just what I intended to do. He, Ormazd, bound those things to those bodily forms and made them corporeal so that creatures can better protect themselves against death. Ormazd himself provides the species of wolf with a body in order to protect his own material creatures and to keep his unique position as the only creature of material Getic world. Another category of animal associated with the army of Ahriman in this cosmogonic war are the craftstar. We translated this term as vermin in our book. It's not the best translation, probably, but we gave one, though the exact meaning is much disputed. Craftstar is a term used specifically for reptiles and amphibians, such as frogs, scorpions, lizards, and insects, such as ants, beetles, and locusts. In general, any creature that creeps, crawls, pricks, bites, or stings is a craftstar. One of the duties incumbent on Zoroastrians is to kill craftstar. However, again, Zoroastrian theology gives an explanation for the existence of this nasty creature that is very similar to one for wolves, as reported in the Bundahišn as follows. When the evil spirit burrows through, he mixed the vermin's poison and evil spirits, those of snakes, scorpion, lizard, ants, fly, locusts, and many other similar sorts, with the water, the earth, and the plants. There they grew, conceived from the four elements, and the earth was knee-deep in vermin. Their being, the light of their eyes, and their vital spirits belong to Ormazd, as they are in the world. Their ways of sin and malevolence belong to Ahriman. The fact that people can see them is a great advantage, for they can either kill them or protect themselves against them. It is clear that they are not Ormazd creations because their displeasing form and color are unlike those of cattle and wild creatures. Their scarring appearance and nocturnal misdeeds are of the same nature as darkness. They do not hold back from injuring the creatures through fearsome trials, harm, and assault. Like drugs, their bodies enter healing mixtures, and this benefits the creatures, for they come from the four essences and Ormazdian elements. This last paragraph is interesting because Zoroastrian highlighted that although they belong to Ahriman, their material and thus positive bodies can have benefit for human beings and can be used in medicine. Its purpose is repeated also in the chapter in following paragraph. This state of mixture, Gemeinschaft, is destined to end, at the conclusion of the limited time, 9,000 years, fixed by our mass for the battle. Then a final stage called Bundahišn, the separation, starts, and it leads to the resurrection and the salvation of the dead. Both right to say weak, again, we can talk later about this perfect idea of salvation, the final defeat and expulsion from the restored world of evil, and the return of the creation to its original pure state. This process is described in detail in the chapter 34 of the Bundahišn. In particular, this passage that describes the forces in play in the ultimate battle. And I'm very close to conclusion. Then Ormazd will seize the evil spirit Ahriman, Wahman Akoman, Ardawaish Tindar, Shahreval Savur, Spandarmad Taromad. We have Archangel and let's say main demoniac general. Spandarmad Taromad, Ordad Amurdad Tairiz and Zairiz, right speech, false speech, right speech, false speech, righteous Trosh, Cheshmok, the bloody clan. And then two things will remain, Ahriman and us, the creed. The evil spirit in us, laid low by the chanting of the Gathas and made powerless, will scurry back to darkness and gloom through that passage in the sky where the first burrowed through. It is not at all clear what the final destiny of Ahriman and his demons will be. This is my last dialogue with late Professor Gerardo Gnoli, and still, it's for me very moving. They will be banished from the restore the pure world, but it remains unclear if evil will be definitively destroyed in its spiritual Menok dimension. Another Pahlavi test states that it will be beheaded. Or if Ahriman and his evil companions will be thrown again into the infinite darkness from where they came, and they will continue to exist in this dimension, in the spiritual dimension, not anymore in the material dimension, powerless and harmless. And I think I'm supporting this idea. The most relevant thing to stress is that all human beings, even those who were wicked during their lives, will be saved after the restoration of the world. It's cool because hell is a kind of temporary abode and not an eternal one, like in Christianity or Judaism, for example. Even though there are also something to say. This is because it is necessary to remove any trace of evil from the earth, and even from hell. And of course, because of the great compassion of our Master. To conclude, evil has an important place in Zoroastrian cosmology. The wicked and vicious opposition of Ahriman and his companion to Ormazd, and his good creation are paradoxically essential and unavoidable in the process of the creation of the world, and the destruction of evil itself, and the restoration of the original pure and ideal world by us. The Bundahišn seems to fully understand the central role played by Ahriman and his demons. The book emphasizes Ahriman's prominent dualistic position in the context of the cosmogonic and eschatological world. That is the main topic of the book, perhaps even more than the creation itself. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Domenico, and also to Sam for your presentations. And we have a little bit of time for questions or comments, and the floor is open to the audience for any questions or comments you may want to ask or to make. perhaps Domenico and Sam, I understand that one of the motivations why you decided to publish this translation was not only the fact that this text has been that existing translations are outdated. Well, the main translation which we have is, of course, Anglesaria's translation, but which was published in the 1950s. But this is a translation which is very hard to read because it's full of Pahlavi words, and it's sort of half Pahlavi, half English. So I understand that one of the motivations which made you take up this work was to put the Bundahišn on the stage of a work of world literature, and to make it accessible and to show its significance and also its literary merits. And I wonder whether you could comment on this and explain to us its main literary merits, why you think it deserves to be regarded as a major work of world literature alongside the Shahnameh and other important compositions.
Okay, I'll tackle that. There's also some family happening in the background, as there is in these pandemic times, so everyone bear with me. No, it's a good point, Almond. I think that the Bundahišn deserves to be considered as part of world literature precisely because I think for two reasons. One is that it is so influential as a book and as a representative of the connections between Zoroastrianism and other religions in late antiquity and the early Islamic era. But also when, Anglesaria's translation was path-breaking and important and has served really as the scholarly resource for the past 50 years. And I don't think it's a bad translation. I think that it's one that reflects a certain tradition within the Indian Zoroastrian community, and reflects also on an assumption of a level of knowledge and a level of familiarity with Zoroastrianism and the technical terminology. And I think that was right when Anglesarius was working for the people for whom he was writing. But the problem is that here we are in 2021 already, and that familiarity is gone from the academic community and the intellectual community more broadly, right? Not just people outside the specific field of Zoroastrian studies, but there are very few people in Jewish studies with which I'm also familiar, or other fields who know the terms that we talk about. And what we wanted to do in this book was, and in this translation, was to make it accessible terminologically, so not to include all the Pahlavi terms, but also to bring forth the poetry that's in this book. I think some of the passages that Nico and I both read, and there are others as well, really sing, and it's easy to read these texts as documents. It's easy to read this book and other Zoroastrian books as historical sources and nothing more. But there's much more there, not only philosophically and literarily in the way that I was trying to talk about, but also just as poetry, just as good writing, as beautiful writing. So that would be my answer. Nico, maybe you have something to add?
I agree with Sam, and I have to say that we had to take a lot of compromises when we translated this text, because we had really to surf in two different waves. That there is the philological one and the literary one, because sometimes we didn't want too much to be far from the original or the more technical translation of the word, and but finally we have we spent 10 years, we have to say, really working on on this. It means to try to not be too technical in order to make the text not accessible for not Iranologists, and use a kind of more literary and more accessible vocabulary. And the result is not perfect, but as I used to say every day, probably, we really hope that we gave a base to work. It means we are open, of course, to suggestion, to feedback. We would like, it's like a never-ending thing, work of translation, because it's possible to improve. And the other thing, I agree with Sam, that many people, not Iranologists, they were looking for a translation of a Bundahišn accessible. And when I used to work with the edition and translation of Anklasaria, I was able to check, to amend, to correct, to improve this translation of Anklasaria. But people not Iranologists, they couldn't. And I think, Almut, this is something that we should do also for other texts in the future. It's true that we spent 10 years of our life. We were not father yet. And now I'm father, for example, of 2 children, but I started much before. And, you know, it's a long work. And who knows? We are already some projects, actually, in our mind, new project, but we will see.
Wonderful, thank you. Now I would, anyone who would like to ask a question, please do put your question into the chat, and then I can pick it up from there. We've already got 2. One is from Kersi Schroff, perhaps just continuing with the topic of the literary features of the Bundahišn. Kersi asks whether the Bundahišn can be considered as belonging to a later genre of Zoroastrian mythology, in contrast to the Gathas, which are considered to be, which Cassie thinks are a different type of text, where certain concepts wouldn't be present, such as the concept of duality and of Ahriman, which wouldn't be clearly evident in the Gathas. That's what Cassie writes. Would you like to say anything about that?
I would like to, yes, of course. There is a clear development. In the Gathas, of course, we have not a clear idea of dualism. We have Aura Mazda, and after that we have Spentamanio and Angromanio. It's true that Spentamanio is associated to Aura Mazda, but it seems that this perfect dualism is not at all clear. After that, we already in the not only in already in the Young Avesta. After that, in the Pahlavi test, we see a Spentamanio is embodied with Aura Mazda, and we have a more clear idea of dualism. Really, 2 forces that they are on the same ontological plane. And there is a clear development, but Zoroastrianism developed. Everybody, this is something quite clear, and it's true that we can see in the Bundahišn, of course, some remains of what is Avestan, but of course also the development of other myths.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question here from Jake Benson, who asks about the connection between the Bundahišn and Book 7 of the Denkard concerning Ormast's creation of the corpus of Zardusht, entrusted to Holdad and Amudad and the cloud, and sent it to the earth in the form of rain. And then there is an addition, yet the mixing of water and earth creates salt water as a home for the vermin. So it seems that we have here a sort of a bit of a mixture of different topics. So the first question concerning the overlaps or connections between Bundahišn and book 7 of the Denkart concerning Ormast's creation of Zarathustra.
Maybe I'll start taking a stab at that. I don't want to speak specifically about the creation of Zarathustra, about Zoroaster, but I will say that I think the Bundahišn and the Denkart, certainly in other books in the Zoroastrian tradition, are connected and are in dialogue with each other. Alma mentioned that I wrote my dissertation about the Cosmogonic, which is another one of these Zoroastrian 9th century, give or take, works, also philosophical, also dealing with polemic against other religions. And it and the Denkart and the Bundahišn seem to be somehow connected. I mean, it's a larger question, really, not just about the Denkart and the Bundahišn and the Shkand or this particular issue of Zoroaster, but to what extent are these works separate, and to what extent are they somehow part of a massive material which was separated out into different compositions at a later point? I think it's really a live issue as to whether the Bundahišn, let's say, is an authored work with a particular intention and a particular literary structure and a particular character that is unique to it itself, and the same goes for these other Zoroastrian works, or whether somehow they're all part of the same, like a massive oral or written tradition, which is then encapsulated in different periods by different authors. So I know that doesn't speak exactly to the point you made, but I think the question of how these works are connected is still open, and I don't think there's been enough researchers, at least I'm not familiar enough with it, about how they're connected, in what ways they're connected, and in what ways we can distinguish them one from the other.
Thank you. And we have a question from Shaheen Behradnia. And Shaheen is asking whether to what extent you think the world outlook reflected in the Bundahišn was commonly held by Zoroastrians. That means, how ancient do you think the beliefs of the cosmogonies are as they are reflected in the Bundahišn?
It's an interesting question. And let's say that this is really an interesting question. I would like to be Antonio Panaino now, actually, to answer this question, honestly. And in the rest, of course, we have not any, let's say that the cosmologic ideas are quite inexistent, actually. We have not this kind of thing. I think that maybe we should look at the already Hellenistic period in kind of development. There are serious development, for example, about apocalyptic ideas already, and maybe we could have found this there, but honestly, I'm not sure. I cannot really give a good answer to this question, or a serious question. If Sam has something to say.
I think Nico's right. I think this is a very difficult question. Especially the question of what were commonly held Zoroastrian views, right? In this book, the Bundahišn, and in other Zoroastrian works of the time, we have the writings of an elite. We have the writings of a well-educated, clearly cosmopolitan Zoroastrian elite who are in touch with other traditions and were in dialogue with them. So how much that reflected the Zoroastrian on the street, we really don't know. I mean, it's a question of sources and of the material that's available to us. So we will, as our work and as your work continues forward, I hope that we uncover more and more.
perhaps one could also, perhaps you can do that also, Sam and Domenico. You know, the Dane is constantly being invoked as the source of what is being told in the Bundahišn. And then it's the Damdartnask, which is being referred to as a text which we don't have, but which is being mentioned as a source where this material comes from. And it's absolutely right. We have nothing of a coherent account of cosmology in any way comparable in the Avesta, but we do have something in the Avesta. Ideas, certain concepts, also even in the beginning of the Frawadinjast, we have a cosmogonic section, and it's always, the main feature is always that the cosmos didn't just take shape by itself, but there is an agent behind it, and the name of that agent is Ormazd or Ahura Mazda. And we also have the antagonism between good and evil very clearly in the Avesta, which, as you have pointed out, in the younger Avesta, we have already the merging of Spenta Mainyu and Ahura Mazda into one, as opposed to Angra Mainyu. And in the Gathas, we also have the antagonism, and it's very clearly in the symmetrical opposition between the destructive force, Angra Mainyu, and the creative force, Spenta Mainyu, the life-giving force, which is a better translation for Spenta. So there we have this symmetrical antagonism on that level, whereas Ahura Mazda is one level up, and he is the source of Spenta Mainyu. And we also have concepts of how the material world came about, made by Ahura Mazda, and where there is a large amount of publications on all of these topics. So, but as you say, we don't have a coherent account. So it has to be pieced together from individual pieces of puzzle. But surely we can see in the Bundahišn and in most of the Pahlavi literature, they constantly refer to the Dane. That means these are not original compositions which were composed by someone inspired in the 9th century, not at all. It's all very traditional. It's based on long-standing oral traditions, which have all fed. There is a long stream of oral tradition composition, which has all flown into this, and we have this codification then from the 9th century. And of course, there are constantly also accretions over time, which are added to it to make the account more fully. This very complex question, very difficult question about this multi-layered literature. But much of it, the roots go back into the old Iranian times and even earlier, I think. And we have a very nice comment here from Bini Karigat, who writes, "Thank you, Samuel and Domenico, for researching and writing a book that hopefully a layperson can read and understand." And I think this is a very nice comment, which I think all of us would like to join in. And if there
well, thank you. I mean, I would only say to that, thank you very much, and we hope that the book fulfills that hope.
Yeah, thank you. And if there are no more questions, there is nothing more in the chat, except perhaps Jake, I'm not sure whether we have done justice to your question, because you mentioned quite a number of other things about the rain and the clouds and drops and all of that. And I'm not quite sure how we can deal with that. But perhaps as we have such a nice conclusion in the comment of Bihini Karagat, perhaps we can all switch on our microphones and give you a big hand to say thank you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
everyone. Again, thank you so much.
And thank you to our wonderful audience.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.